Mazan used to be an unremarkable little town in southern France. Today, it's better described as a place of evil because it's now known that among its residents lived a monster. In the quiet town of Mazan, a crime so disturbing remained buried in secrecy for nearly a decade. To those who knew them, Giselle and Dominique Pellicot were an ordinary retired couple, enjoying the peace of their later years. She was kind, devoted, and deeply rooted in her family, while he was seen as quiet but respectable, a man who had tried his hand at various businesses before settling into retirement. Their home was warm, their children visited often, and to the outside world they had built a life many would envy. But behind those walls, something sinister had been festering for years, an unimaginable betrayal hidden in plain sight. Giselle had spent years feeling drained, waking up confused, struggling with memory lapses that seemed to have no explanation. She dismissed it as exhaustion, the effects of aging, the natural toll of time. Doctors assured her it was stress, that she needed more rest, that perhaps she was simply overworking herself. But what if it wasn't her body betraying her? What if the real betrayal was happening while she slept? She had no reason to suspect that the very man she trusted, the husband she had spent decades beside, was not only keeping secrets, but was orchestrating something so monstrous that the truth would shake an entire nation. What had been happening to Giselle all those years without her knowledge? Who were the faceless men caught on tape, and how had they gained access to her home? What had Dominique done to ensure that his wife never suspected a thing? As detectives unraveled the case, each discovery was more horrifying than the last, revealing a network of crimes so vast that even the most experienced investigators were left in shock. But perhaps the most terrifying question of all, if this had gone undetected for nearly 10 years, how many more victims might still be living in the same nightmare, unaware of the horrors unfolding while they slept? Welcome to the Crime Series. I'm glad to have you join us on another video. Kindly subscribe, like, and share. Let me know where you are watching from. Dominique Pellicot was born in 1952 in France, growing up in an environment marked by hardship. The details of his early years remain unclear, but what is known is that his childhood shaped him into a man who carried unspoken frustrations and desires, emotions that would later manifest in unimaginable ways. In the same year, miles away in Villingen, West Germany, Giselle came into the world. Born into a French military family, she was raised with structure, discipline, and the reality of frequent relocations. At the age of 9, she suffered the devastating loss of her mother, yet she would always describe her childhood as a happy one. Strong-willed, warm, and intelligent, she possessed a natural charm that made her well-liked. She built a stable career in administration at the state electricity company, earning a reputation for kindness and efficiency. When she was 20, she met Dominique. He was ambitious, brooding, and carried an energy that intrigued her. He worked as an electrician and later ventured into real estate and business, though not always successfully. In 1973, they married, stepping into what appeared to be a promising future together. Over the years, they had 3 children, navigating the ups and downs of life as a family. Dominique struggled to maintain financial stability, his business ventures often failing. He had ambition, but lacked the ability to follow through. Still, they carried on, playing the roles expected of them, their life appearing normal to those around them. After decades of work, they retired in 2013, settling in Mazan, a beautiful small town in southeastern France. It was a place of quiet charm, where life moved at a gentle pace and neighbors greeted each other by name. For Giselle, it was perfect. She found joy in the local culture, joining a choir and embracing a community that welcomed her. Dominique, on the other hand, took up cycling, spending his days riding through the countryside. To anyone looking in, they were a couple enjoying their golden years, surrounded by family, indulging in their hobbies, and living in peaceful retirement. Years before moving to Mazan, Dominique had already begun leading a secret life. In 2010, he had been caught taking illicit photos of women in public, an act that resulted in nothing more than a small fine. He never told Giselle about it, and she remained unaware of his growing obsession. What started as a voyeuristic impulse soon escalated into something far worse. By the time they had settled into their new home, Dominique had immersed himself in the darkest corners of the internet, engaging with men who shared his depraved desires. He wasn't just lurking, he was actively learning, planning, and setting the stage for what would become a horrifying reality. The people of Mazan knew Dominique Pellico as a quiet, retired electrician who spent his days cycling through the countryside, while his wife Giselle embraced retirement with warmth, immersing herself in music and community life. Together, they seemed like any other aging couple, comfortably settled into the peaceful rhythm of small-town life. But beneath this illusion, Dominique was harboring a horrifying secret, committing a betrayal so unimaginable that it would shake the town and the entire country to its core. The secret is so terrifying that it will make you cry. Dominique Pellico was not the quiet, retired electrician people knew him as. He was a deadly criminal. Giselle, Dominique's wife, began experiencing strange symptoms. She was constantly exhausted, suffered from memory lapses, and felt an unexplained weakness that doctors struggled to diagnose. At times, she feared it was early-onset Alzheimer's, a tumor, or some unknown illness. Yet Dominique was always there, reassuring her that she was simply overworked, convincing her that it was nothing serious. She trusted him, never suspecting that he was the very reason for her suffering. But Dominique was not who he claimed to be. For many years, Dominique started drugging his wife without her knowledge, using her to fulfill his sexual escapades, orchestrating and recording her during his numerous sexual assaults. He was smart, calculated, and knew how to keep his secrets hidden. He spent years perfecting his method of drugging his wife, learning exactly how much of each pill to give her so she would remain completely unconscious. He did this carefully, often mixing the drugs into her food and drinks. Sometimes he put them in her beer. But when she noticed it turned green, he quickly threw it away and never made that mistake again. Dominique's crimes went beyond what he did himself. He invited more than 70 other men to rape his unconscious wife. He found these men on a secret online forum where he openly talked about what he was doing. He posted messages looking for men who wanted to join him in abusing his sleeping wife. These men were not just strangers from far away. Many of them lived nearby, less than an hour away from his home. They visited multiple times, taking turns abusing Giselle while she lay unconscious, completely unaware of what was happening to her. One of his most chilling strategies was the way he lured these men into his crimes. He knew exactly how to appeal to their darkest desires, writing explicit online posts detailing his exploits and offering them the opportunity to join in. He played the role of a mentor, providing step-by-step instructions on how to interact with his unconscious wife, ensuring that they followed his carefully constructed rules. His ability to recruit accomplices so easily speaks to his manipulative nature and complete lack of empathy. Dominique was more than a criminal. He was a predator who thrived on control, deception, and the suffering of others. Dominique was highly skilled in manipulation. He created a false sense of normalcy around his household, ensuring that no one, even his own children, questioned his wife's declining health. He controlled her diet and behavior, making sure she attributed her constant exhaustion and physical pain to stress or aging rather than the actual cause, his repeated drugging. He used gaslighting tactics to make her doubt her own experiences, convincing her that she was imagining things when she felt oddly tired or disoriented. His ability to deceive didn't stop with his wife. He maintained a flawless public image, appearing as a devoted husband and father. Neighbors and friends described him as warm, polite, and respectable. This allowed him to continue his horrific crimes without suspicion, hiding his true nature beneath the surface. He even participated in community events and engaged in casual conversations with law enforcement, creating an aura of innocence that helped him evade justice for nearly a decade. Dominique's meticulous attention to detail extended beyond his victims to the way he managed his crimes. He maintained detailed records of the drugs he used, experimented with different combinations, and adjusted dosages to ensure his wife remained unconscious for hours. He learned from his mistakes, carefully refining his methods so that no one, not even his closest family members, suspected what was really happening behind closed doors. Dominique documented everything. He was obsessed with keeping records of his crimes, as if he needed to relive the abuse over and over. Over the years, he amassed more than 20,000 photos and videos capturing the horrific violations he committed against his unconscious wife. He did not simply store them, he meticulously categorized and archived them, labeling each file with details about the assaults, the dates, and even the identities of the men he invited to participate. His main collection was chillingly titled Abuse, a name that left no room for doubt about his intentions. Dominique did not keep these recordings to himself. He used them as a tool to attract and recruit other men into his twisted world. On the dark corners of the internet, he would share select clips or images demonstrating exactly what he was offering. He boasted about what he had done and invited strangers to join him in committing the same horrific acts. By distributing these recordings, he was not only normalizing sexual violence, but also expanding the network of abuse, ensuring that multiple men took part in his crimes. Each file he shared became a permanent digital scar, evidence of his evil, yet also an invitation for others to do the same. These recordings also revealed Dominique's strict rules for his accomplices. He knew that any mistake could wake or leave evidence of what had happened, so he set rigid guidelines for the men he recruited. These included no strong scents. The men were forbidden from wearing cologne or smoking cigarettes before arriving. Any strong odor could linger and potentially alert Giselle that something was wrong when she woke up. No talking above a whisper. The men had to communicate in hushed voices. Dominique feared that any noise above a whisper could stir Giselle from her deep, drug-induced sleep. No sudden movements or cold hands. If their hands were too cold, the sudden contact could shock Giselle awake. They had to warm their hands before touching her, ensuring that their movements blended into the unconscious haze she was trapped in. Dominique was in complete control. He dictated when the men could enter the room, how they could touch her, and when they had to leave. He ensured that every act followed his plan, reinforcing his role as the master orchestrating this horrific abuse. If you found this story compelling and appreciate the way we bring real-life cases to you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps us continue to uncover the truth and share these important stories. Like, share, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. These rules serve two purposes. First, they help prevent discovery, allowing the abuse to continue undetected for nearly a decade. Second, they reinforce Dominique's need for dominance and control. By forcing his accomplices to follow his precise instructions, he ensured that even other rapists acted under his command, further feeding his ego and sense of power. Dominique Pellicot's violations of privacy extended beyond his horrific abuse of his wife. He secretly recorded intimate images of his daughter, Caroline Darien, and his daughters-in-law, betraying their trust in one of the most invasive ways possible. His actions demonstrated not only an obsession with control, but also a complete disregard for the dignity and autonomy of his own family members. Dominique carefully planned how he would spy on his family. He installed hidden cameras in the bathroom of the family home in Mazan, a place where his children and their spouses would often stay during vacations and family gatherings. The bathroom, a private space where individuals should feel most secure, became a place of violation due to his sinister actions. The cameras were discreetly placed, positioned to capture explicit images without detection, allowing him to compile hundreds of intimate and indecent photographs over time. The sheer number of images taken suggests that this was not a one-time incident or an impulsive decision. It was a long-term, premeditated effort to violate the privacy of his own daughter and daughters-in-law. Each image was carefully saved and stored, some of them labeled and categorized, reflecting a deeply disturbing level of intent. What made this crime even more was the way he manipulated and degraded the images. Some of the photographs were altered and defiled with explicit captions, dehumanizing his victims in ways that revealed the depth of his depravity. One of his daughters-in-law was referred to in an edited image as "my slutty daughter-in-law." This was not only a massive invasion of privacy, but also an act of psychological cruelty that made his crimes even more unbearable for the victims. For years, his family members remained unaware of what was happening. They went about their lives, trusting him as a father and a father-in-law, never suspecting that their most private moments were being recorded and manipulated by someone they loved. For nearly 10 years, Dominique Pellico carried out his horrific crimes in complete secrecy. He had mastered the art of deception, hiding his abuse behind the image of a loving family man. His wife had no idea she was being drugged, raped, and exploited. The men he invited into his home never spoke out. The neighbors never suspected a thing. He was confident, careful, and methodical. But in late 2020, he made a mistake that would finally unravel his dark world and expose the horrors he had committed. Dominique had grown bold over the years. The secrecy of his crimes gave him a false sense of security. He was so used to getting away with his actions that he believed he was untouchable. Perhaps he wanted a new thrill. Perhaps his addiction to power had pushed him to take greater risks. Whatever the reason, he began acting on his perversions outside his home, where he was more likely to get caught. His first public crime was voyeurism. Pellico started going to a local supermarket, where he would secretly film unsuspecting women. He used a hidden camera inside his bag to capture footage of their underwear as they walked past. This was a far cry from the carefully orchestrated abuse in his home, but it showed his growing recklessness. The security guard noticed something suspicious. He had seen Dominique lingering in the same aisles, acting strangely. On multiple occasions, Dominique was seen positioning his bag close to women in a way that didn't seem natural. The guard had a feeling something was wrong. One day, after watching Dominique closely, the guard decided to act. He caught Dominique in the act and stopped him before he could leave the store. The guard then approached one of the women Dominique had targeted and urged her to go to the police. At first, the woman hesitated. After all, it was just a pervert filming women, not a serious crime. But the guard insisted, telling her that Dominique had done this multiple times and that he needed to be stopped. She finally agreed to report it. When the police arrested Dominique, they believed they were dealing with a small-time voyeur. It wasn't uncommon for men to get caught secretly filming women, and while it was disturbing, it usually didn't lead to anything more. But they still needed to check his phone to confirm what he had been doing. What they found shocked them. As they searched his device, they discovered something far worse than supermarket voyeurism. Hidden among his files were disturbing conversations with other men. The messages detailed how he drugged and raped women. He didn't just talk about it, he gave instructions to others on how to do it so well. In one of the messages, he described the precise dosage of drugs to use, the best time to administer them, and even how to ensure the victim stayed unconscious for hours. He shared his success stories, detailing how he had done this many times without being caught. He bragged about how his wife never suspected a thing. The police realized they weren't dealing with an ordinary voyeur. They had uncovered something far more sinister. The messages alone were enough to warrant a full investigation. The police immediately obtained a warrant to search Dominique's home. When they arrived, they confiscated his computers, hard drives, and other devices. What they found was even worse than they imagined. They uncovered 20,000 photos and videos of abuse. The footage showed Dominique drugging his wife, raping her, and allowing dozens of men to do the same. Every video was carefully labeled and organized. There were files for each of the men who participated, with dates and details of their attacks. Dominique had even kept logs of which drugs worked best, how long they lasted, and which men had been his favorite clients. For the investigators, it was overwhelming. They had just walked into one of the most horrifying cases of sexual abuse they had ever encountered. Dominique had managed to keep his crimes hidden from his wife for nearly a decade. But now, the police had to tell her the truth. She was called into the station, under the impression that she was there to support her husband in some legal matter. She had no idea what was coming. As she sat down, officers began to show her pictures and videos of herself. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. She thought it was someone else. Then, slowly, reality hit her. I was looking at my own body, but I had no memory of those moments. I had no memory of those nights. I was unconscious the whole time, she said. Giselle's entire world shattered at that moment. She had been living in a nightmare without even knowing it. Police also show Carolyn, Dominique's daughter, photos of herself, unconscious and partially undressed. Carolyn also realized she had also been drugged. However, there were no videos proving her father had raped her, but she has no doubt about what happened. She knows she was drugged. She believes she was assaulted, but because there was no clear video evidence, she was not legally recognized as a victim. "I don't sleep like that, I know myself. There's no way someone could enter my bedroom and take those pictures unless I was drugged," Carolyn said as she addressed police officers. This left her in a terrible place. Her mother was officially recognized as a victim, but she was not. The truth came out piece by piece. His crimes had spanned nearly 10 years. Over 70 men had been involved. Some of them were neighbors, acquaintances, and men from nearby towns. They had all willingly participated in his sick fantasies. Dominique, alongside 50 other perpetrators, were arrested after numerous investigations, with about 22 men still at large. For the first time, the 50 men who had been arrested were brought together in one place, forced to confront the magnitude of what they had done. Many of them, when first arrested, had attempted to deny their involvement, claiming they had not understood what was happening. Some insisted they had been led to believe that Giselle was a willing participant, acting out a fantasy with her husband's consent. Others argued that Dominique had manipulated them, deceiving them into thinking that they were part of something consensual. But the overwhelming evidence told a different story. The courtroom was filled with forensic reports, psychological evaluations, and hours of video evidence that Dominique had meticulously recorded over the years. As the trial progressed, forensic experts explained the devastating effects of long-term drugging, detailing how powerful sedatives like Temesta, lorazepam, affected memory, consciousness, and bodily functions. Giselle had experienced years of unexplained exhaustion, memory loss, and hair loss, symptoms she had believed were signs of stress or aging. In reality, her body had been absorbing toxic levels of sedatives, causing not just neurological damage, but also making her completely defenseless against the men who entered her home under the cover of darkness. Medical reports presented in court confirmed that Giselle had suffered long-term physical harm. She had been diagnosed with multiple sexually transmitted infections, some of which had gone untreated for years because she had never known to seek medical attention. The most shocking revelation was that one of the rapists had been HIV positive at the time of the assault. While medical experts confirmed that his treatment had kept his viral load undetectable, meaning he had not transmitted the virus, the mere knowledge that she had been exposed to such a risk was enough to add another layer of horror to Giselle's ordeal. The case had now evolved into something much bigger than the crimes of one man. As Dominique sat in court, listening to the evidence being presented against him, psychologists and forensic analysts attempted to dissect his mind, to understand what had driven him to orchestrate such a heinous series of crimes. What became clear was that Dominique was not just a man with perverse sexual desires, he was a man obsessed with power and control. Dominique had never viewed Giselle as a human being with thoughts, emotions, and autonomy. To him, she had been nothing more than an object, a possession to be used and displayed for others. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Dominique showed no genuine remorse for his actions. When he was first arrested, he had immediately confessed, but not out of guilt. Rather, it was as if he saw no point in denying what had already been uncovered. He had spoken of his crimes as though they were mere inconveniences, regretting not the trauma he had inflicted on his wife, but the fact that he had been caught. Psychologists who examined him described him as a man incapable of true empathy, someone who viewed the destruction of his life's work, his hidden world of control and abuse, as a greater loss than the suffering he had caused. Meanwhile, the defense lawyers representing the 50 co-defendants scrambled to shift the blame away from their clients. Their strategy was clear: paint Dominique as the mastermind, the manipulator who had tricked these men into unknowingly committing crimes. They argued that these men had been victims of deception, that they had trusted Dominique when he assured them his wife was a willing participant, and that they had never intended to rape an unconscious woman. But the prosecution was ready for these arguments. Prosecutors presented online chat logs showing that many of these men had engaged in explicit discussions about what they were going to do before they even arrived in Mazan. Some of them had returned multiple times, proving that they had known exactly what they were participating in. Others had followed Dominique's specific instructions to avoid leaving behind evidence, further proving that they had understood the nature of the crime they were committing. As the trial dragged on, the media coverage intensified. The case was no longer just about the crimes committed against Giselle. It was about what this case represented for the future of legal protections for victims of drug-facilitated sexual assault. Activists and advocacy groups demanded stricter laws against online platforms that allowed predators to organize and share their crimes. Experts called for better regulations on sedative medications, tighter restrictions on digital privacy violations, and harsher penalties for those who participated in these types of offenses. Public outrage grew as more details emerged, fueling a larger conversation about how society viewed victims of sexual violence and how the justice system had historically failed those who could not fight back. There was a shift in awareness, a reckoning that was long overdue. The world was now watching, waiting for justice to be served. For Dominique and the men who had followed him into the darkness, the illusion of invincibility had been shattered. Their crimes had been exposed, their actions laid bare for all to see. The question now was not whether they were guilty. The evidence had already answered that. The only thing left to determine was what their punishment would be. The court was preparing to deliver its verdict, and for the first time in years, Dominique Pellicot was no longer the one in control. As the trial reached its final days, the world waited for the court's verdict. The weight of expectation hung heavy in the air. Would the law deliver the justice that Giselle deserved? Would Dominique, the man who had orchestrated this nightmare, face the full consequences of his actions? Would the men who had so eagerly participated in his crimes be held accountable? The answer was imminent, and for the first time in years, Dominique Pellicot was no longer in control. The final stage of the trial allowed each of the accused to make a last statement before the judges withdrew to deliberate. Dominique Pellicot, the man at the center of it all, stood in front of the court with an expression that betrayed little emotion. He spoke, but instead of expressing deep remorse for what he had done to his wife, his words were self-serving, focusing more on the consequences he had suffered rather than the devastation he had caused. He acknowledged his wife's strength in coming forward, but his apology was hollow, an empty attempt to salvage some dignity in the face of overwhelming evidence. It was clear to everyone in the courtroom that his primary regret was being caught. His statements did nothing to erase the years of suffering he had inflicted on Giselle or the way he had robbed her of nearly a decade of her life. One by one, the 50 other men on trial had their turn to speak. Some remained silent, aware that there was nothing they could say that would change the inevitable outcome. Others insisted that they were not rapists, that they had not intended to commit such a crime, as if their ignorance could somehow justify what they had done. A few muttered apologies, but the lack of true remorse was evident. Their words felt rehearsed, as though they were less concerned with the damage they had caused and more focused on minimizing their own punishment. But the prosecution had already exposed their actions in painstaking detail. The video footage, the chat logs, the clear instructions they had followed, all of it painted a picture of men who had willingly participated in the rape of an unconscious woman. Some of them had returned to the Pellicot home multiple times, eager to take advantage of the situation, proving that they had known exactly what they were doing. Once the final statements were made, the judges retired to their chambers. Unlike a jury trial, where deliberations could involve hours of debate, this case was different. The 5 judges cast their votes in secret, carefully considering each charge against Dominique and the 50 other men. The process was methodical, ensuring that each sentence matched the level of participation in the crime. Some men had been present only once, while others had returned on multiple occasions. Some had actively engaged in the abuse, while others had been complicit by watching or filming. Every role had to be accounted for, every act weighed against the evidence presented. On December 19, 2024, the judges returned to the courtroom. The judges began with the man responsible for orchestrating it all. Dominique Pellico was found guilty on all charges. His punishment was the maximum sentence allowed by law, 20 years in prison. It was the harshest penalty possible under the circumstances, a recognition of the unimaginable harm he had inflicted on his wife. There had never been any doubt of his guilt. But hearing the official sentence sent a wave of finality through the courtroom. He had spent years controlling, manipulating, and destroying his wife's life. But now, his own freedom had been stripped away. He had thought himself untouchable, but justice had finally caught up with him. The court then moved on to the others. Every single one of the 50 men was convicted. Not a single person walked free. The sentences varied based on the severity of their involvement. 2 men were convicted of aggravated sexual assault and received 3-year prison sentences. 2 others, found guilty of attempted rape with aggravating factors, were given sentences of 5 and 6 years. The rest, convicted of aggravated rape, received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. The verdicts sent a powerful message. There would be no leniency for those who participated in such crimes. Every man who had stepped into that house, every man who had followed Dominique's instructions, every man who had chosen to violate an unconscious woman was now facing the consequences of their actions. The moment the final sentence was read, reactions rippled through the courtroom. Some of the convicted men sat in stunned silence, their fates now sealed. Others wept, realizing too late that they had gambled with their freedom and lost. Their families, who had stood by them in the hopes of leniency, broke down in tears, but their grief paled in comparison to the suffering of the woman they had wronged. There was no sympathy for them. The court had made its decision, and there would be no escaping the prison sentences that awaited them. This was more than just a high-profile case. It was a moment of change, a step toward a legal system that took the rights of unconscious victims seriously. Laws would be reviewed, policies would be re-examined, and the conversation around consent and sexual violence would never be the same again. For Dominique Pellico and the men who had followed him into darkness, the illusion of secrecy was gone. They had spent years believing they could act without consequences, that they would never be caught, never be held accountable. But now, they sat in their prison cells, their futures destroyed by their own choices. The world had seen their crimes, and there was no erasing what had been exposed. Justice had finally been served. The trial was over. But its impact would last for years to come. The case of Dominique Pellico is a chilling example of how even those closest to us can hide their true nature behind a mask of normalcy. His ability to deceive and manipulate his own family for years shows the importance of vigilance, even in personal relationships. Trust is valuable, but it should never replace awareness. If there is one lesson to take from this tragic story, it is that secrecy often protects predators, not victims. It is essential to speak up when something feels wrong and to always advocate for those who may not have a voice. Privacy violations and abuse thrive in silence, and only by bringing such crimes to light can justice be served and future victims be protected. For those who have suffered from abuse, whether physical, psychological, or digital, know that you are not alone. There are support systems available to help survivors heal and seek justice. If you or someone you know suspects abuse, it is crucial to seek professional help, contact authorities, or reach out to support networks that specialize in aiding survivors. Let this story serve as both a warning and a call to action. Abuse and exploitation should never go unchallenged. Every individual deserves safety, dignity, and respect. If you found this content valuable and believe in raising awareness about issues like these, please consider subscribing for more content that sheds light on real-life stories and critical discussions. Your support helps ensure these important topics reach as many people as possible.